This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence. This week, myths about the homeless and why we want to blame the victim.
Homeless people really are us. They're just a much, much less fortunate subset of us.
Who the homeless really are when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
This is an invisible population nationwide. It's a swelling population. This is America.
Soaring housing prices are driving more and more people into homelessness. Then,
control is an illusion. Companies offer some choices, but they don't offer choices like stop surveilling me.
The digital privacy conundrum. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
On Thanksgiving, our thoughts turn to turkey dinner with all the trimmings, a crackling fireplace, and football on TV. It's a time for home and family, unless you're one of the 500,000 people in the United States on any given night who has no home. In most cities, the homeless will be hard to miss as we start our Christmas shopping the day after Thanksgiving, and it's those street people who often form all our impressions of homelessness. But that can be misleading. Those living on the street make up only about a third of the homeless nationwide. Far more sleep in shelters or in their cars, and less than 20% are chronically homeless. The rest have fallen over the edge of poverty for just a few days or weeks.
There is no real single predictor of what separates a very, very poor person or family from being housed or homeless. It's just there are no easy predictors of that. It just seems to be some crisis of economic proportions.
That's Dr. Deborah Paget, professor of social work and global public health at the Silver School of Social Work at New York University.
For any given person, it's often a matter of a life of poverty, sometimes of trauma, and then a medical crisis or an eviction based on landlords upgrading the properties, raising the rents exorbitantly. Those kinds of things happen at the downstream or sort of the proximal level. But the ultimate cause of homelessness is the fact that since the Reagan era, and starting somewhat before that, the federal government has stopped building new public housing and really ratcheted back support for rental vouchers and that kind of thing. And for the most part, left it to the private sector to build housing with some kind of hope or wish that some proportion of that would be affordable, which, of course, for the private sector would cut into profits, so it makes it very difficult.
More than one study has found that it's frighteningly true. Most people are just one or two missed paychecks away from homelessness. Nearly half of Americans don't have enough savings to pay an unexpected bill of just $400, so the homeless could be anyone.
The typical, if you say average homeless situation, is a single parent, usually a mother with young children. And again, you get disproportionate numbers of African American young mothers and young children. But what we're seeing also with families is a growing crisis of older single adults or older adults with adult children who are homeless, living together with their adult children in cars. And then among youth, the average homeless youth is someone who's either aged out of foster care or is a runaway or a push away, shall we say, from a dysfunctional family situation.
Most people are unaware of that, Paget says, and instead accept as fact many of the myths and misconceptions about the homeless. They add up to saying, if you're homeless, it must be your own fault.
To blame the victim is sort of to shine the spotlight away from the larger picture of what's going on here. But it is very much human nature to see a person and say, you know, here you are on the street, you've made bad decisions, you're using drugs, or you had a health crisis you couldn't work around, or, you know, these kinds of things.
Paget says one of the biggest myths is that most homeless people are mentally ill, turned out onto the streets by deinstitutionalization. However, Paget says the proportion of mentally ill homeless people isn't that big, nor does deinstitutionalization fit the timeline of when homelessness exploded.
Given the persons who were severely psychotic on the street were so visible and got so much of the public attention, there was this natural tendency to say, well, we closed the hospitals, therefore most homeless people are those patients who were released from hospitals and had nowhere to go. But the problem with that is that deinstitutionalization really started in the 1960s and 70s. So there isn't a timeline that really does that fit. And then the other side is there's been very good research. Now, by that I'm talking about serious mental illness like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and those individuals make up about 1/3. That's not to say that many homeless people are suffering mentally. It means they just don't have this diagnosable kind of psychotic disorder.
Another myth? That most homeless people are alcoholics or drug abusers who spend whatever money they get on their habit. Paget says experts believe that 20 to 40% of the homeless have a substance abuse issue. That's still a serious number, but she says it's rarely the sole cause of homelessness. More often, it's a response to being homeless.
We don't want to pretend that they don't spend money on drugs or alcohol, but so do the rest of us in our homes. So does the rest of American society spend. And to a large extent, that spending is often a way of kind of escaping the realities and the horrors of living on the street. So that's kind of the approach that we take, is that some people do spend their money. But when we really talk to them about how they make a living and what little money they can make through recycling cans and so forth, most of that goes to buying food or toiletries and necessities.
Homeless people are also often seen as criminals who are prone to violence. Paget says in reality, violent acts are often in self-defense. What's more, the homeless are more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators. However, it is true that homeless people are more likely to have criminal justice intervention, but that's because homelessness itself has been criminalized.
It's been criminalized from the very beginning, but it seems to be getting worse as public sympathy to help the homeless or to punish them tends to rise and fall. But local business districts and usually political authorities see no upside to it and prefer to have the police or some ways to punish the homeless. And so the criminalization is largely small ordinance violations like trespassing, public urination, but whatever they're doing are just doing the things that the rest of us do indoors but don't get punished for. And the criminalization comes from getting a summons to appear at court. You don't appear in court, then a fine goes out, and before you know it, you're in jail for not paying the fine for that small infraction. And so many homeless people get caught up in the system and end up spending some time in jail strictly for doing things that, like I said, the rest of us do indoors and don't get punished.
Many people believe that the whole problem wouldn't exist if the homeless had enough responsibility to go out and get a job. What you may not know is that many homeless people already do have jobs, but they don't pay enough.
A significant proportion of homeless people do have jobs. These are often people who sleep in their cars because they simply cannot afford to pay the rent on the salary that they're making. The ones we interview, the homeless people, are more likely to be chronically homeless and to have mental problems and so forth. But even those individuals have what we call kind of income-creating activities, whether it's recycling cans, passing out flyers for a local business. Sometimes it's sort of underground economy. It could be selling drugs or contraband type things. But most homeless people have some way to get an income, and a fairly significant percent, particularly outside of big cities, do have jobs. They just can't afford rent.
And if you want to get a job, how can you look like a viable candidate in interviews when you're living in a shelter or on the street?
We've seen people who try to stay clean, and it's hard to take a shower and get cleaned up to go to your job when you're sleeping in a tent, in an overpass. And for those, but it's also fair to say that many cannot get a job. Either they're not competitive due to mental illness or other problems in their lives where they didn't get enough education or job experience to make them competitive. And, in an economy that's become increasingly more technologized and more reliant on more education and more training, these individuals are the first to be left behind when it comes to looking for a job.
If the goal is to get people off the streets, get a job, and get off drugs and alcohol, Padgett says the surprising solution is to provide housing first. Don't require them to abstain from drugs first or have a job first. It's nearly impossible to do all those things without a home, and those rules simply drive homelessness up.
People just thought, it's not going to work. You're not going to take a person who's actively using crack or drinking heavily, has a mental illness. It's not going to work. They can't live indoors. They can't. Well, it did work. And you can take people that had been ignored by every other homeless program and give them access to housing, and lo and behold, they adjust, and they do pretty well. That was kind of the revelation, I think, of Housing First, is that it went against every core tenet that we had in American society, that if you didn't have housing, you had to earn your way back into that situation. And it was a fairly gutsy move to say, no, you need a home first. It's never housing only. It's always housing plus, because individuals often do need help with money management or nutrition or cooking and doing things to adjust to living indoors.
However, Padgett says we lack the political will to take the billions we spend on shelters and jail cells and put it instead into subsidized housing for the poor. It's a culturally difficult adjustment to make.
We have a deep strain in our society of a person should be self-sufficient. And it goes back to the Puritans in the era of work hard and you earn the rewards of hard work. And we do have compassion. We're better at, for example, we have disability income for a person who has a diagnosed serious mental illness. So they make a certain amount a month. If you have a sight problem or if you're physically disabled, we do have programs for those individuals. But what we don't seem to do very well at, and what we seem to have lost compassion about, is just being poor without having a disability and just simply not able to pay the rent.
However, Padgett says there are practical reasons to consider housing first for the homeless. She says the research is pretty remarkable.
It's actually more expensive to do nothing about homelessness than it is to invest in placing people, in the apartments, into units, and providing the support services. Those two things sound expensive, but they're actually less expensive than doing nothing.
You can find out more about all of our guests through links on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. I'm Reed Pence.
Supporting immune function through a healthy diet has become an important new focus for many people these days. One key recommendation is to eat more vegetables and fruits, such as grapes, every day to improve immune function. Combining grapes with vegetables can help achieve this goal in a tasty way, according to registered dietitian Courtney Romano, health advisor for the California Table Grape Commission.
Fresh grapes are heart-healthy and hydrating and linked to benefits in multiple areas of health, including supporting immune function. Grapes are always a smart snack choice on their own, and they also pair well with other healthy foods such as vegetables to enhance flavor and nutrition. Add grapes to a kale, spinach, or arugula salad. Roast grapes with cauliflower or broccoli. Combine grapes with cucumbers and feta for delicious and healthful eating.
Grapes from California are a natural source of antioxidants and other polyphenols. Visit grapesfromcalifornia.com for more information and over 300 recipes.
More than 80% of people say that vision is the most important sense. So why do about half of us skip our annual eye exam? Dr. Valerie Sheedy-Pallone, optometrist and vice president of Eye Care Solutions at VSP Vision Care, shares why you should book a comprehensive eye exam, even if your eyes feel fine.
Comprehensive eye exams are more than just visual correction. They can also help detect signs of underlying chronic health conditions like diabetes, which show no obvious symptoms, especially in its early stages, which is why catching these diseases sooner with the help of an eye exam is so crucial. Your eye doctor can tell you more about your overall health than you may ever know. We do that by dilating your pupils or using non-invasive technology to look at the blood vessels in the back of your eye.
VSP Vision Care is the only not-for-profit vision benefits company in the U.S. and has been a leader in health-focused vision care. Schedule a comprehensive eye exam with an eye doctor today. It's easy to find one near you at VSP.com. That's VSP.com.
When the alarm bell rings for an emergency, firefighters' hearts pump faster and their blood pressure soars, according to a new study presented at the American Heart Association Scientific Sessions 2021. Researchers outfitted more than 40 firefighters with wearable blood pressure monitors during their shifts and found that systolic blood pressure typically rose by 18 points or more during both fire and medical calls. Deborah Fairheller of the University of New Hampshire is senior author of the study.
All emergency and first responders should be aware of their health. Almost 3/4 of firefighters have high blood pressure, and less than 25% of them have it under control. This study shows that blood pressure can increase to very dangerous levels when responding to emergency calls.
Among firefighters, more than half of deaths in the line of duty are related to cardiovascular disease. Researchers hope to increase awareness that many firefighters have high blood pressure, and they should have it well controlled to avoid dangerous levels during emergency calls.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.
Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
Misinformation creates a world where people don't know what to believe, so they believe nothing.
Doctors try to fend off false claims about COVID vaccines for kids.
Then why demanding people get vaccinations might be doing more harm than good.
We like to be given choices. We don't like to be told to do this or to not do this as human beings.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.